Hey, welcome back to the channel, welcome back to Wildlands, and we are finally at the point where we can put the finishing touches on our very first thematically inspired area, the Riverbanks of Southeast Asia. For those of you who have been following along, you remember that last time we created ourselves a large elephant house, complete with an interior area that our elephants are enjoying while they are desperately waiting to be freed from their prison and get into their outer habitat. That is what we are tackling today, and once we have completed it, it will bring us round to, conveniently, coming up on 1 year in Wildlands Zoo. Now, to really celebrate that year and drive the nostalgia home, let's jump a little bit down memory lane, and we're going to start off with, if you enjoy the video at any point today, don't forget to tippy tap that like button. If you are not subscribed, make sure you click the subscribe button down below. And to round off the end of the year episodes of Wildlands, I want you to pop the elephant emoji in the comments below, all for the sake of engagement. It's been a while since we've done one of those, and with that all completed, let's go. So we are very much picking up where we left off. Last episode we did a broad outline. We're going to start sculpting that in a lot more. Now we're starting off with the terrain stamp tool, and long-time viewers will know me and the terrain stamp tool don't get on well. But it's really the only way we're going to get these lovely square sort of edges. So we're using that to just mark out along the edges of the path. Originally I intended this to be a dry moat, but actually I kind of came around to the idea that I'd like the elephants to have a bit of a swimming pool within their habitat. Now, we are going to be doing a dual habitat, and those of you that have seen one of my very long ago community zoo videos where we built a Asian elephant mixed habitat with some otters and I believe it was some gibbons, will remember that we also built them a sort of forest area and a non-forest area. And we're going to do that again, but we're going to do it in a much more controlled manner, and also in a way that I probably intended the original one to work, but because we were trying to mix too many animals in there, it got a little bit hectic. This time it's going to work perfectly. So we're starting off just by building ourselves some concrete areas, some concrete sides of a more man-made moat, and we're going to fill that with water. And then on the other side, we will build ourselves a pond that will be within our forest habitat. Now, I'm sure long-time viewers of many Planet Zoo YouTubers will have heard this tale by now, but for those of you not fully up to date, the idea is that Asian elephants do live a lot in forests, but they absolutely destroy the trees. So in order to moderate the amount of damage that they can make, a lot of zoos will have these sectioned off areas that they just let the elephants in every now and then, and that way they can control how many times they are destroying those trees and allow them to sort of grow back and recover, while also giving the elephants a lot more enrichment of being within a forest habitat rather than just your normal wide open and very uncovered areas that you tend to find in zoos and in the way that they keep more African elephants. With our sculpting complete, we're going to go over the whole lot and start throwing down some texture. Now, the right-hand side, if we look at it from this position of the habitat, is going to be one of those more traditional muddy, sandy, open areas. And this is where the elephants will always have access to. You tend to find they're like this because, as I say, elephants like to destroy everything they can get their trunks around. But equally, it makes it a lot easier to look after, a lot easier to clean, and a lot easier to maintain. Now, because of the way that the Riverbanks area has set out, the guests are already going to be quite elevated up and away from the elephants, so we don't have to worry too much about putting too many visual barriers in their way. What we are going to do, however, just to stop elephants falling off the side of the moat, is we've put down the electric fence there. That's just more as a precaution. And then we've got our big poles here, which are just made from concrete and wood, and these are just there as sort of a natural barrier without blocking the view. They've got the wood on there so the elephants can interact with them, but equally they're not going to get hurt if they push up against them or butt into them. Now, because the elephants can get down the slope and into the water, they're not really there to keep them out, they're just there to direct them to the nicer path. Around the rest of the habitat, we're going to bring back our metal and wooden log fencing that we used in our wetlands habitat. I just love this fence. It kind of works really well. Again, a lot of elephant habitats, certainly the more humane ones, tend to avoid using too much metal fencing, and they do tend to go for more physical barriers, normally giant logs, purely because elephants will just not try and force themselves through spaces that they can't fit. Where we are going to use metal fencing, however, is going to be over where the forest meets the more barren area of the habitat. And that is because we don't want elephants consistently trying to get into the forest section. We're going to reuse the fence that we used inside of the elephant house, and that's because A, I like the fence, and B, it works. So we're just going to drag that all the way along, and I'm going to create a gate using the bracing pulleys. We've done this before in previous habitats, and it looks really good. And we're also going to put a little wheel on the front. This is, again, just a manual gate. All about this habitat is not electronic. It is very much just a guy goes in and can pull it open and pull it closed. Now, once I've done that, I'm actually then going to make a bracing bar from the other side. So this can be pulled across to stop the elephants pushing the gate inwards when it's closed, and just means that if the keepers want to keep them out, there's not a lot they can do about it. So for that, we're going to use the painted beam as a big iron bar, put a couple of handles on it, and then we're just going to build a frame around it to allow it to roll forward across the gate once the gate is closed. Down in the water, we're just going to submerge a couple of concrete pylons. Again, a bit like with the wooden logs. These are just to stop the elephants trying to push their way through the fencing and get into the other side of the habitat where they're not meant to be. With that done, we've got a good framework to start getting everything planted out. So we're going to start on that next. And you can kind of see here that actually we've got quite a big area, and that was always the plan. Now, before we start going crazy with the plants, we're also going to get some enrichment items in. Now, I am very sad to say that unfortunately this habitat has been hit with a very long-term existing bug where a lot of these items are inaccessible. They do still interact with a lot of them, but unfortunately there is something with a lot of the larger base game animals that doesn't seem to affect a lot of the more up-to-date ones, but the Asian elephant especially does get affected by it, as does the Indian rhinoceros sometimes, where they just can't interact. Once that started happening, the only way of fixing it is to actually start a new zoo, and it is an absolute pain. So what I'm doing is I'm going to go through and I'm going to make a couple of toys out of non-interactable objects. That doesn't matter if the elephants don't interact with them, they just look a lot more like they're made for the enclosure. Now, I really wanted to get the water in, even though I really don't like this enrichment item, just because it's one of the very few large items that the elephants can use. So to make it a little bit more grounded, we're going to make a faux rock setup, sort of like made out of what would in real terms be made out of like a concrete rock setup or mod rock. We're going to colour them grey so they look fake. They're not meant to blend in. I'm just going to make this little area where we can have the water falling onto these rocks, and it just gives the elephants something of a different texture to walk about and interact with. Weirdly enough, this is one of those items that it says they can't interact with, but for whatever reason they do. Just to really give it a little bit more visual, even though the elephants don't really interact with these little water jets, we've made a sort of water fountain around it. And then I'm just going to put a couple of vents underneath the water itself, as all of that water needs to go somewhere, otherwise we just have a wet, muddy mess. With that attraction done, we're going to go over some of the raised elements in the back and just fill them in with rock. Now, the main idea is eventually behind this habitat will be a small tended forest that's going to separate off what will eventually become the future grounds of Coltham House. Now, keep your eye out, because very early in 2025, we are going to move up through the zoo and we will be seeing the wonderful Coltham Manor House. And I've got a few ideas on how we can turn that into part of the zoo and bring a couple of very high profile animals in. It's all sketched out and ready to go. I was planning on doing it this year, but looking at it, it's going to be probably the biggest thing we have started to build in this zoo, certainly, and possibly on any of my videos as of yet. But I'm very excited for it, and I invite you to put down your guesses in the comments below as to what animal is going to be residing in the wonderful stately home of Coltham House. Now, for those of you that have seen me do rock work before, it's very simple. We're mixing the temperate rocks with a little bit of the tropical rocks for soil. And then once we've completed all of the rocking, we can go on to placing down some trees. Now, I'm grabbing trees from around the zoo and replicating them. I have been far too guilty in the past of not setting myself up a proper plant palette. So this is the way I'm getting around it. We're just going to grab new trees from around the zoo rather than putting in ones out of the selector. And at some point, this will all start to come together. We're also going to bring in more of the bushes. Bushes are great at hiding view lines and just clogging up the visuals. If anything, I would love for us to get more variation of ground shrubs, but for now, we're just going to sink some trees into the ground to make that effect. For this habitat, because it's more densely vegetated, we're going to use the fog grass instead of the buffalo grass. Firstly, because it does work with the elephant's biome requirements and the continent requirements, but equally because it's just got that thicker look to it. I'm also going to splatter a couple of fallen trees. Again, elephants, destructive. So we're going to take some of our birch trees. I'm just going to drop them into the pond and also splatter them around the forest area. I didn't want to make this too busy and too forested because then you wouldn't be able to see the elephants. They're already at quite a distance. But this also allows people that are on the playground, which we built a couple of episodes back, to see through the playground and catch the glimpse of an elephant just walking along the fence line. I've also gone ahead and just placed a couple of toys inside the forest. They're not going to be in here in reality anyway all the time, but obviously we do want to give them a reason to bring them in and sort of be just moving about in the forest so you can catch glimpses of them. In line with what I was saying last episode, there is also a much bigger focus now on adding in lots more little details. So for example, we're throwing a load of plants around our fallen trees, which is where they would sort of start to grow as the wood starts to rot down. We're going to use the hosta and the nettle for that. And I'm also, for the first time ever, going to use these ridiculously big mushrooms that you can get from the Twilight Pack, which I forgot existed until I was randomly searching and was like, oh, big mushroom. We're going to sink them in though, so they look more like a more normal mushroom that would be found growing on fallen logs. But I think they had a nice little bit of detail, and I need to start using a little bit more funnier things like that. We don't want to go full on realism. Full on realism's boring. You need a bit of fantasy in there as well. Speaking of plants in areas they shouldn't be, the good old periwinkle comes back once again to add in algae to our waterways. We're going to keep them in areas where the water would naturally collect, so sort of around the bottom of our pillars and at the edges where they meet the walls. I'm just going to use this so we just don't have one big flat piece of water. It adds a nice little bit of greenery to it. With the planting relatively complete, we can then move on to stylising up the visitor areas. So obviously we've got our concrete barrier going all the way around our moat. And now for the bit that the guests will be able to see through, we're going to bring back our walls. These walls are very quickly becoming one of the most favourite things I have ever built. And if any of you would like, I can more than happily pop them on the workshop. However, a couple of episodes back, you'll have seen me build them, so it might be worth giving them a go yourself, because then you can play about with the colours as well. All we're going to do is just mark out a couple of areas. I don't want it to be open all the way along. I don't think that gives you a nice inclusive experience. I think if you could just see it from all angles, I'd rather you have specific viewing areas. So what we're going to do is make an outcropping in the middle that we can plant up, much like a lot of the Riverbanks area. It's very enclosed. It's got these walls all around it, and it's got all of this greenery just sprouting from the top that really disguises and makes everything feel a little bit bigger. You don't realise you've gone in a whole circle by the time you've walked through it, and I love the way that works. To stop idiots throwing their kids into the elephant enclosure, we're going to bring in our Indonesian walls along with a bit of decoration on top, and we will come back here later on to put a couple of shelters over as well, just because I felt it needed something to decorate it up a bit. Now, to add a little bit of fun, I'm going to chop some holes in some of these walls as though they've sort of half fallen down. I'm going to do that from both sides as well. This is going to create a little viewing window for you to just catch a glimpse as you're walking by. Again, just to stop idiots climbing through, we're going to put some ropes in. We're going to use the zookeeper rope for this one. And a bit like we did last episode, we're going to use hinges as little anchors to bolt them into the rock. And again, a little bit of detail, but I just love how it looks. And these are one of my favourite things in zoos, where you have these little peep throughs and it's like, oh, animal. Yeah, I really, really enjoy it. A little bit of gardening now, so we're going to come back with the mulch, just cover over this horrific mess of brick that we've got in this centre portion. Again, you've seen me do this a couple of times by now, but essentially we're just going to fill it all with soil and then grab some plants from around. So we've got a bit of bamboo, we've got some hedges. I think I threw a couple of foxgloves in there. It really just adds a bit of greenery. Hitting the final straight, it's time to get a shelter made up. So I'm going to use the Indonesian thatch because I love the shape of it. I'm just going to build a very simple, very basic bamboo framework. So we're going to match the colour to the wood. I know I could have changed the wood colour on the ceiling there, but it looked fine. I just made a bamboo frame. This is very much one of those times where you keep adding stuff until you think, right, I've added too much, and then you stop, take a couple of bits off, and you're good to go. So it's just a lot of bamboo. I do put in some TV screens or some education screens, because for once, and everyone will be shocked at this if you're a long-term viewer, I have finally done some custom signs. I've been saying it for months. But yes, we've finally got a couple of custom signs. And I have a template now, which I'm going to use to make the rest of the zoo custom signs with. So keep your eyes out in future episodes because they should be coming a lot more fast and thicker than they currently do. Once we've got our structure complete, I'm going to pop a couple of stone base bits onto it. Again, just a little bit of detailing. And we also got some donation bins in because, again, we are still a franchise zoo and this habitat was not cheap to make. Now, as I add on a couple of extra bits of detail, some lighting, those education screens I mentioned, I think it's time that we have a look at the finished result. Now, I think we can all agree that 2 weeks stuck inside was well worth it for our wonderful ladies here to finally be out in the open and enjoying their habitat. The habitat looks big for them, but then I kind of thought this is how you want to see elephants in a zoo. Like, they shouldn't look massive because their habitat should always look bigger. It's a brilliant, what is essentially right now centerpiece to Wildlands, and it's certainly the best entry animal enclosure I've ever built. I love it. I spent so long taking photos, and I'll probably pop a load of those up on the community tab because it's such a thematic and scenic setup. And the whole Riverlands area started off as one of those little ideas where I was like, oh, I really want to do a bit of Cambodian architecture, and it's become one of those things I'm really proud of, and I really hope you guys have enjoyed watching it come to life. And with that pretty much rounds up our year for Wildlands as well. There is one more little video I'm going to try and squeeze on out to you. Whether that will be before or after Christmas, we'll find out, but it's not going to be a new habitat. We are instead going to look back over the year at all the work that we've done. And we're going to recap on the story of Wildlands Zoo as we will be bringing back Lord Coltham and all of the other characters into the new year. Yep, we are not getting rid of Wildlands. Wildlands not going anywhere. Now, with this being the likely last episode before Christmas, for those that do celebrate it, I hope you have a wonderful time. And I hope that you join me again afterwards as we jump on into a brand new year of Planet Zoo, as well as other games, and see where we can go. It has been quite a 12 months, and thank you all for supporting me and the channel in the way that you have. It has been absolutely excellent. For those who missed it, a few episodes back, I did mention about the Gunter Gaming Discord, where I post all of the early previews of each episode, as well as multiple community game nights, D&D, you name it, we do it. You'll find a link for that in the comments below. And when you join on in, let them know where you found it. Don't forget to pop your engagement emoji in the comments down below. Give it a like if you've enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're not subscribed. I will see you in 2025, and I can't wait to see what we get up to. See you then. Goodbye.